It's time to get educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. Before we get started, would you please hit that share button so we can get more people involved? That's always a good thing. Today, we start in Connecticut, where a 77-year-old school nurse has been suspended after confirming on social media that puberty blockers are being used on at least one 11-year-old girl in a school, while a dozen others identify as non-binary, and their parents have been kept out of that particular loop. So this is a nurse who, one wonders if it's her age demographic, right? To be 77 years old is to remember a world long before this nonsense transgender stuff took off. So she's doing what I think is her conscience says. We're trying to warn parents that they're gender transforming your children, and they're not even telling you. And we've got actually one little girl who, I would imagine, prepubescent or right on the cusp of puberty, who is now taking very, very problematic hormone therapy to stop I've always wondered about that. Why in the world can you make an argument that before a child even goes through the ritual, the biological ritual of puberty, how can you know what you are? I mean, how can you say for sure, without ever experiencing puberty and the radical changes that happen, that what you're going to be on the other side of puberty is what you think you are now? This nurse, for having the good common sense to try to get the word out, she's on what may end up being permanent leave.
So what happened was Kathleen Cataford was writing a Facebook post, and she was in a mom's group, and one local mom requested recommendations, basically, for local schools. And so Kathleen wrote there giving solid advice, saying, investigate the school system curriculum. Connecticut is a very socially liberal, gender-confused state. And she says, as a public school nurse, I have an 11-year-old female student on puberty blockers and a dozen identifying as non-binary, all but 2 keeping this as a secret from their parents with the help of teachers and social workers and school administration. Oh, really? She's also said, continued on, that teachers and the SSW, the social workers, school administration folk, are spending 37 and a half hours a week influencing our children, not necessarily teaching our children what you think is being taught. And she said children are being introduced to this confusion in kindergarten. And Kathleen is absolutely correct. This is happening all across the nation. And so basically someone got wind of that, and it was actually the mom of the 11-year-old, but there's no identifying information other than an 11-year-old. So whatever, I guess that means she must be suspended because she violated code. And this is from Richard J. Kinsella Magnet School. So the officials got wind of it, and then so she's been suspended from being the school nurse. And she's probably the only one who is providing good care at that school, based on the information I have in front of me.
Well, this has been, 2 full years in the Dr. Duke Show that I asked this question, and it never changes. When was the last time we heard any of these school administrators, any of these teachers, any of these programs talking about how we're going to educate our kids to read better, to do math better, to do science better? I mean, it is unbelievable. There are more education stories in the news every day than in the history of my life. I mean, you think it's only been a couple of years where we would never hear almost anything about schools unless there was some reason, something that happened that would be stunning, like a school shooting or something. Then the schools would be in the news. But we're trying to figure out stories to do on a weekly basis for the Dr. Duke Show. I'm pulling 40, 50 stories, each of which we could do if we had time. So some really great stories fall out of the loop because we can't do enough of them. And not one of those stories, anywhere, anyhow, anytime, has to do with what, mom, you think you're sending your kid to public school for. I believe, moms, you still think you're sending the kids for reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that is so far not the case. And it's been two years I've been seeking this out. Some fundamental story, whether a teachers union, whether a group of superintendents, teachers themselves, talking about how important it is to get back to the business of literacy and high achievement, but never comes.
And we're talking about the school nurse who hopefully knows some science. And so if you kept reading on her Facebook post, she did say that science tells us that a child's brain continues development into the early 20s, hence laws prohibiting alcohol, tobacco, vaping, and cannabis. But it's okay to inject hormones into confused prepubescent children and perform genital mutilating surgery on adolescents. How incongruent is that thinking? And being the school nurse, citing science, clearly she needed to be suspended. But anyway, I continue. Of course, we have a response coming out of the school district. The Hartford School District officials said that, well, you can't read it up there. It's a long post. Let's just say they had to send out a letter, and they said about how concerned they are. They said that, Hartford Public Schools strives to provide an inclusive environment where all students feel seen, valued, respected, and heard. We uphold all of our staff to a high standard, entrusting them to be caretakers and leaders in the community. We as a school district are responsible for the health, well-being, social, and emotional development and safety of all of the children entrusted to our care. It is our responsibility to support our students' growth, personal experiences, and social, emotional development. It is unacceptable for any member of our community to make any student feel unwelcome, especially someone that has a responsibility to serve as a trusted confidant and obligation to preserve their personal health and well-being.
And you know what that says to me, that letter that she just read you? That this is a clinic, not a school. They have decided that they're clinicians, that they are caregivers, that they are safe spaces for all sorts of biological and physical explorations, right? These are clinics. They're not schools. And I get it. In a clinic, it's much more dangerous to give away potential medical history than it is in a school. These are clinics.
With all the censorship taking place on social media platforms, we've made it easy to keep up with your favorite content. Simply download the Freedom Project Media app in your App Store. Get access to 18 new videos a week, plus thousands of archived shows, lecture series, and educational animations. Download the Freedom Project Media app on your Apple TV, Roku, tablet, or phone, and make sure you allow for notifications to keep you informed.
Once upon a time, Title IX was a rule that was used to help women. And if Joe Biden and his administration get their way, it will be a rule to help men. So the U.S. Department of Education is writing new rules that would make discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity illegal under Title IX, which is, if you didn't know, a 1972 law that had banned sex discrimination in education. So, of course, it would be illegal for states to prohibit gender dysphoric male athletes who present as female from competing against women in college athletics. That's happening? I didn't even know. Now, schools receive federal funding, which is basically almost 99.9% of them. Any of them that receive the federal funding must permit that transgender athletes get to compete according to their self-identified gender, or they just are going to risk losing any federal funds. And that's why we say, as soon as you take any government money, they got you. And they got you by the balls, literally, in this one, which is what they want. And they will have this whole presentation of what's going to happen happening in April, so stay tuned to that. Now, the White House is currently reviewing their language on it to see actually what's going to happen, but it's going to be coming out there.
And it's outrageous that the White House alone gets to rewrite these definitions. You may remember back in the Obama administration, he did this as well. He did the Dear Colleague letter. He basically tried to do the same sort of thing with just making changes to the law to be able to take away young men's First Amendment rights when it comes to being accused of sexual assault. Colleges are still doing that, violating on the basis not of the Constitution of this amendment from Obama. And here you have a similar issue. And you gotta wonder, will the next Republican president go in and remove this? Because if he does not go in and remove this, then we're starting at a very dangerous place, right? Here's what the draft text reportedly reads: discrimination on the basis of sex. Katie gave you a good sense of that. Discrimination on the basis of sex includes discrimination on the basis of sex stereotypes. Sex stereotypes. That, you understand what that means, right? Man and woman, mother and father, are now going to be included in sex stereotypes. If you don't use the left's preferred language and you go on calling mothers mothers, you're engaging in a sexual stereotype. This is how down the road this gets. Sex-related characteristics, including intersex traits, pregnancy and related conditions, sexual orientation, and gender identity. It's unbelievable what you're about to we're entering in, because there are consequences of this for daily language, speech, and common sense belief in biological science that are going to be completely upended once this is done. And we'll see if we get a majority Senate and House. Will they do anything about this? Because far too often when Republicans take power, they stand what the Democrats have done. You've got to go in and rip this out by the roots, or Western culture as we know it will never be the same.
And this change to the federal law is enacted via executive order, so you don't need the House or the Senate in this one, because you have the executive powers of Joe Biden to be able to do this. Now, this would conflict then with this federal executive order would conflict with 12 states that currently have passed the fairness in women's sports laws. And so that would become a state versus federal. And hey, maybe we would actually see how our Constitution holds up to that, because we're supposed to have powers in the states, not just the federal government, but we don't care about that right now.
And still in all, action by the Congress in particular, and ultimately the Senate as well, can inviolate any executive order if they got their minds together to do so. But when's the last time we saw that happen?
Well, checks and balances is a thing
of the past
in concept. Now, the Supreme Court did rule 6-3 in favor of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, protecting gay and transgender workers from employment discrimination. And the court majority had reason that people being fired for being gay or transgender were being treated differently because of their sex, which is illegal. Now, because Title IX and Title VII are similar, Joe Biden is arguing that the same reinterpretation should apply in education, which also makes sense that, I mean, if they're similar, then what does it matter?
Yeah, but
boys
it's not,
and girls, similar.
But it's not similar. We just read you the language. This is not about protecting somebody's right to hold a job, right? This is about redefining formally, without any medical evidence to do so or scientific basis to do so, by one man's pen, redefining what actually these kinds of people are. And number two, then forcing you not just to not fire them, but to speak the way they want to be spoken to transform our relationship between science and reality, making that secondary to this kind of dysphoric delusion. That's the big difference.
Today's show is sponsored by our friends at MyPillow. Save up to 66% on all items at MyPillow.com when you use the code Dr. Duke. That's DRDUKE. Support this show by supporting a great American company.
Well, let's just go to the college campus and see what is happening and what the students think, because they don't think, so that's why this segment is always a fun one. We have campus reform reporter Alexa Schwera, who visited George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and she wanted to ask students if men should be considered for this year's Women of the Year honorees. Now, USA Today released their 2022 Women of the Year, and you would think there'd be women on that list. And maybe, yeah, there are some, but there's also a male or maybe even more. But some of the notable selections included Olympic gymnast Simone Biles, Vice President Kamala Harris, and philanthropist Melinda Gates. And also at least one man. The national honoree was Rachel Levine, whatever, who's the Assistant Secretary of Health and is also a man.
USA Today has put out their list for this year's 2022 Woman of the Year honorees. What if I told you that one of the women who was honored is actually a biological male?
Great. It depends on the current identity of the person. It depends if they identify as a woman or if they're transitioning to being a woman. I don't see anything wrong with that.
They identify themselves as a woman, that's totally fine.
Oh man, I'm gonna be in trouble. It's not a woman, it's a biological male.
I'd still count him as a female.
Hell yeah.
Okay, like, I mean, if they're female now, like...
For Women's History Month? I wasn't expecting it to be a male. I guess it's okay.
It's good to see the inclusion.
That's absolutely ridiculous. That should not be allowed. Your biology dictates who you are. People say gender and sex are very different. I completely disagree. The fact that society is making it more acceptable, it's very ridiculous.
This year we have Rachel Levine, who is the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Health, was honored as a Woman of the Year. He is a biological male, transitioned to be a transgender woman. Do you think that this is fair to honor as a Woman of the Year?
I don't think that there's a reason you have to be born biologically a woman in order to be Woman of the Year.
People can transition to being female. They have all rights to be a female.
If they see themselves as a woman, it is fair. That's definitely fair.
They're a woman?
I would say so. If they're a trans woman, they are a woman. Statistically speaking, there will always be far more cisgendered women than there will be transgender women. Having the one every now and then, not going to hurt anybody.
My favorite was that last guy. I'm just going to say again what he said, and I guess I'm gendering him. Statistically speaking, there will always be far more cisgender women than there will be transgender women. And so having the one every now and then will not hurt anybody. How many times have you been told, oh, just this once, it's only one time thing, or just, I don't know, just let them get married, or just let them have civil unions, and then just this, and then just that, and then it just keeps going.
Welcome to the modern college campus where telling the truth is meaningless, where truth itself is no longer relevant morally, ethically, or even factually. Congratulations, universities of higher learning, for completely giving up on knowledge altogether.
So we must remember here, these women of the year, including, again, Melinda Gates, Simone Biles, Kamala Harris, and then Rachel Levine, are, as they are told by the USA Today, they are strong and resilient women who have been champions of change across the country.
Which is actually the transgender, Kamala or Rachel?
I don't know. And they lead and inspire as they promote and fight for equity and give others a place to seek help and find hope. Well, in that case, then, like that one kid said, who says you have to be a woman to be Woman of the Year? That Joe Biden could be Woman of the Year, most of the teachers. If it's all about fighting for equity and giving others a place to seek help and find hope, then, I mean, we have so many Women of the Year. I don't know if we're going to be able to fit them all in one issue.
Hello everyone, I'm David Fiorazzo. Well, education content is always the primary focus of the Dr. Duke Show. Before we go, we wanted to leave you with a few other stories worthy of a comment or two. So let's start in Australia, where Professor Alan McKee at the University of Technology, Sydney, says, quote, "It's important that we do everything we can to help young people become porn literate." Well, that's certainly a hot take. In a recent post, the professor claims adults should give kids access to the best porn to answer their questions. He tweeted, quote, "What's the best porn for young people? If you're an adult wanting to support a young person in your life with a healthy sexual development, here are the hacks you need. My new blog for sex school." Wow, So now we're mainstreaming the idea that kids should learn about sex by watching porn. Very healthy. Right, got it. Now, next, let's head over to Florida, where a kindergarten teacher was recently interviewed on MSNBC on his thoughts about a new bill, 1557, also known as the Parent Rights in Education Bill, which basically says students in kindergarten through third grade shouldn't be indoctrinated with any sexual nonsense in the classroom. Well, one teacher had an interesting interpretation of the bill. Watch this.
I know my kindergarten standards through and through, and nowhere in our curriculum does it have anything about teaching sexual orientation or sexual identity. So for them to say that's happening, it's kind of crazy. But we should be able to have discussions, and that's what we're encouraged to do in kindergarten. And then personally, because my kids do have questions. They want to know who my partner is in pictures outside of my classroom, and I should be able to speak to that.
So just to be clear, according to this teacher, Florida curriculum says nothing about teaching little kids about sexuality and gender, but now he's very upset that he can't have those conversations with 6-year-old students. Okay, I think we're all following now. All right, now, since we're talking this crazy, let's wrap things up by heading to the leftist bastion that is California, where the city of Palm Springs says it's approved a program to pay transgender and non-binary residents $600 to $900. Why? Well, just because they're special. The city council unanimously approved the plan to set aside $200,000 to give to select identities to use as they see fit. The reason? Well, they claim transgender and non-binary people are one of the most marginalized populations in the city who face some of the highest levels of housing insecurity, joblessness, and discrimination. So, Duke and Katie, I have to bring you in on this one. The moral of the story is embrace the LGBTQ agenda and give them all your money because they're special. Does that sound about right?
Well, capitalism is an evil system, and so there should be no money anyway. So that, I think, sums up exactly this whole entire situation.
I think if you go back to the first two stories and you combine that kindergarten teacher who says there's nothing in the curriculum about homosexuality, but I talk to my 5-year-olds about it anyway because I'm married to somebody, and then you take the guy from Australia, why don't we show 5-year-old kids in kindergarten pornography and make everybody happy on the left? That wraps up this show. For David, Katie, and me, until next time, we will stay educated and hope you do too.